appreciate everybody for coming today, and I also appreciate our panel participants for joining us. I'll let them introduce themselves here in just a second, but first a little bit of housekeeping. So if you haven't joined us before, this is MCI's Lemonade Stand. We originally started this in COVID times. We were trying to make lemonade out of the lemons that life had given us, but we found that this was a really useful opportunity to bring together groups of people around kind of shared interests and shared topics, and bring up things that we felt were really important for the male contraceptive community. Today, we're going to be talking about delivery systems and ways to deliver male contraceptives to users. And we think that this is a really interesting conversation right now because, one, the place that so many male contraceptives are in the development pathway, they're primed to start thinking about their delivery system. You know, they may have a molecule, but they don't have any way to get it into people yet. And I think it's important for them to start considering that. And then two, thinking about the ways that we can learn from and take advantage of information that's been gained in other studies for delivery systems, especially for contraception. Thinking about how the acceptability of IUDs has increased as we've learned more and been able to educate people. Thinking about how male methods, when people are asked the question of what they're into, so many of them say, you know, oral pills or something that's on demand, but they're still dealing with hypotheticals and there aren't real products out there. So we think that these sort of conversations are important, one, to talk about, you know, maybe user preferences or technologies that we can learn from other sectors, but two, to think about the technical considerations that developers might need to have in mind as things move forward. So with that, I'd love to have our panel introduce themselves. I'm going to start with the first person next to me on my screen, which is Rahima. Go ahead.
Thanks, Logan, for having me here. And hi, everybody. I'm Rahima Benhabbour. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at UNC with a joint appointment in the School of Pharmacy. My lab focuses on developing drug delivery platforms for sustained delivery of drugs for treatment or prevention of disease.
Awesome, thanks. Mark, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Mark Saltzman. I'm a professor of chemical and biomedical engineering at Yale University. My research interest is in biomaterials, primarily polymers for drug delivery. We've been synthesizing polymers and building delivery systems out of them for about 30 years in my lab now, including some novel systems for female contraception.
Thanks, Mark. Jennifer, you want to go next?
Jennifer Ayres. I'm with FHI 360, and we are developing several different long-acting platforms for the delivery of hormonal female contraceptives.
Awesome. And Brian.
So I'm Brian Nguyen. I'm a OBGYN over at the University of Southern California. I also am a clinical trial sub-investigator for some of the hormonal male birth control trials over at the Lundquist Institute in Los Angeles, collaborating with NICHD and the WHO as well in terms of consulting on examining male contraceptive behaviors.
Thanks, everybody. And I did realize I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Logan Nichols. I'm the research director here at MCI. And I'll be just kind of moderating this discussion. We're going to start off with some questions for the panel, both individually and as a group. But you as the audience, if you have any questions that come to mind, feel free to throw them up in the chat. Or later on, we'll have some time that people can unmute themselves and ask questions directly if you need to. So with that, I have a question that I'd like to just start off with. It's kind of a broad cultural question. I'd like to ask it to the group. You know, why is there this cultural association with contraception and the pill? You know, I frame it to people as it's, you know, it's capital T, it's capital P, the pill. Why does that cultural association exist, and why have other contraceptive methods not quite permeated in the same way? I'll leave it to anybody to start off with that and see what the panel thinks.
I can start with that as an OBGYN. I mean, just thinking about the history of contraception, right? You know, the first contraceptive method that was approved was an oral pill, and that's kind of where we focus a lot of our energy in terms of you know, development work. It wasn't until a little bit later that implants and injections became more more well-developed, more researched, and some of the user aspects appreciated. So, based upon that history, there's always been this expectation that it would be a pill.
Yes, I would just add it. I don't think it's a focus just of contraception. I think people think about any kind of a medical treatment. That's the first thing they think about is a pill, because of the convenience and now because of the history of experience in making them. So I think that's sort of natural in all of medicine and pharmacy.
So with that in mind, then, does anyone have anything they'd like to, this is another one for the whole panel, any lessons that you think we can learn from the female contraceptive space, thinking about what started with the pill and is built into other technologies? Is there anything that you think we can learn from that space and apply to male contraception?
Well, I think what we've learned that not every woman is the same. Different women have different needs, different preferences, depending on, whether they're trying to space births or limit. And so having a variety, I think really has increased continuation and compliance. And so there's been a lot of acceptability and user-centered design work around female contraception. And I'd kind of, I think male preferences would be a little bit different. But long-acting, we've seen higher continuation and compliance. One of the biggest concerns with female hormonal methods is side effects. So, just kind of taking that and finding something maybe non-hormonal, better side effect profile. But I think there's lots of things that we can learn from the female space and kind of adapt. But I think having a variety of methods, some men may prefer an on-demand method. I think there's a lot to be learned and can be applied in the male space.
Yeah, I would agree with Jennifer wholeheartedly. I think there's the lesson learned is that there is no one size fits all, and the more the options, the better. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody is in the same, life stage and needs for contraceptive, whether it's an on-demand or a long-acting. So I think having different options available to enhance compliance and retention of these treatment contraceptives is really important. And understanding what the user's preferences are ahead of time is also very important to understand what exactly are populations, where are the populations that are similar, and what are their preferences to help design products that will ultimately be used.
And I would just underline the points of both Jennifer and Rahima by saying that it's important to have not only methods for different people, but it's also different people at different times of their life. Depending on the context of what they might be going through, what they experience, what they might hear, or just being capricious and wanting to try different things, right? You may find that a method is or a different modality or formulation is necessary for different times of life.
I think we've also learned, some of the pioneering work in drug delivery was done for female contraception. Long-releasing implants like Norplant have been around for many decades now, and we've learned that you achieve things like very long-term reliable release using the right kinds of materials, and so those things are available for any purpose, including for male contraception. We've also learned about, because there's now a long history of having these materials in women in contact with tissues, things like the NuvaRing, which is in contact with mucosal tissue for long periods of time and without many side effects. I think so. We have kind of a set of tools now that one could use in lots of other different applications.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And thinking about, Brian's point as well, that different methods might appeal to people at different stages in their life. An 18-year-old may have very different reproductive intentions than a 30-year-old that's married and in a long-term relationship, as well as different contraceptive needs to fit those situations, even if it is the same person, just at 18 and 30 years old. One follow-up I had about that then is, how, if we have this knowledge base of female contraceptives and how they enter tissues and the developments that were engineered for long release, can we talk a little about how those existing delivery systems might translate to male contraceptives? I think a vaginal ring, of course, is probably not going to translate as well, but there are many others like subdermal implants, et cetera. Do you have anything that anybody on the panel thinks is prime for adoption by men, something that maybe might be less suited, even if it's just a assumption or just a question?
To some extent, it does depend upon the compound that you're really trying to work on, or the mechanism of action, right? I mean, for myself, I work with a hormonal group, and so that is, readily translatable in terms of, let's say, implants, right, that have been examined before. Hormonal implants are a popular method of long-acting reversible contraception that are currently used in women, and they have been studied as well in men. What we have found is that in order to suppress men's sperm to azoospermia, or a low enough level for contraception, that you need multiple implants. And so the really rate limiting step in terms of our research is having a pharmaceutical industry partner who's willing to manufacture and kind of tweak those implants to get to the right release rates and serum concentrations that we need to consistently suppress sperm. So that technology is already kind of primed for potential clinical trials.
Awesome, thank you. So then, Brian, I had a question for you then that kind of relates to that. So thinking about other delivery technologies being applied in the hormonal contraceptive space for men, I know you're working on a transdermal gel. Can you talk about the pros and the cons of using something like a transdermal gel for delivery?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to connect that question to other things that we're learning about our history of female methods, right? What we've learned is that even though long-acting methods are exceptionally good for continuation and compliance, what we do find is that there are some women out there who are concerned about autonomy, right? Being able to remove the method when they want, being able to stop it in the event that the hormones that they feel are disagreeable to them, or just whatever they hear, whatever rationale they want to propose for stopping a method is completely acceptable. And I think that is grounded in somewhat of a medical mistrust narrative, which we acknowledge is real. And when you consider that there are a substantial number of men out there who may not necessarily align with healthcare, right? And so the desire for a daily method that is easily stopped, reversible, can become very, very appealing. And so the gel provides exactly that. In so much as a pill is very much associated with allopathic medicine, whereas a gel may be considered something more like this is part of your daily routine, like you apply your your aftershave or whatever else, right? Or your after shower lotion. That it was proposed that this would be something that would be similar.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of the other methods that are in development, either in clinical trials or otherwise, for hormonal male contraception?
Yeah, sure. I don't want this to overwhelm the input from Rahima, Mark, and Jennifer. So I'll keep it kind of brief here. But the hormonal methods really have been, at least on the male side, have been investigated almost for as long as female methods. And so pills, injectables, topical gels, implants have all been part of the formulations that have been examined. Those hormones will be either independent androgens like testosterone and decanoate, versus combined androgens, progestins, and then most recently, what are called selective progestin receptor modulators that kind of do a little bit of both androgen and progestin hormones. And so the latter category has been the breakthrough in terms of allowing there to be an oral method, an oral male pill, so to speak. Previously, we rely on testosterone and androgens to suppress sperm. And if you were to give testosterone orally, it would, in the doses needed, what ended up happening is that you might have hepatotoxicity or sort of liver damage. And so because of that, there needed to be a different formulation that only recently began showing promise in these selective progesterone receptor modulators. So those are currently in clinical trial right now. They're called, dimethandrolone is one of them, 11-beta methyl nortestosterone is the other. So, oral male pills are kind of this, long anticipated drug. And so they currently are being studied.
Do you have any insights in the acceptability and interest from men with these real products rather than the hypotheticals?
Yeah, so the only published studies right now are dose finding studies. So trying to figure out what is the appropriate dose to suppress sperm. And we actually recently published, 2 of our results, and I'll put their links in the chat here so folks can kind of see that acceptability of these pills was actually quite good. The drawbacks of these pills that they have to be taken with food or a high-fat diet helps to absorb the compound better. But early findings are promising.
That's great. Yeah, I totally appreciate putting those things in the chat. We're happy to share those.
Yeah.
Rahima, I'd love to hear more about your in situ forming implant system and what sort of applications it's seen so far.
Yeah, so we're developing this polymer-based injectable formulation for ultra-long, we kind of label it ultra-long acting delivery of drugs because it's really, it can last up to a year or longer. And so with that in mind, we've been working mainly on developing it for HIV prevention and treatment, but most recently as a multi-purpose prevention technology because it does have many advantages over the nanosuspension IM injections. And those advantages include the ability to co-formulate multiple drugs in a single injection, as opposed to having to give separate injections of 2 APIs. So with that advantage, we're the next stage is to investigate it as a multi-purpose prevention for HIV prevention, but also a contraception. And more recently, we have been funded by the MCI to explore this avenue for male contraception so that we can actually provide more of a long-acting injection for male contraception as opposed to a pill, a daily pill, for example, or on demand. So this would be a long-acting delivery method for male contraception. There are a number of different applications that we have in mind that we will be exploring in the future, but currently we're really focusing on HIV treatment and prevention, multi-purpose prevention, and also male contraception. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. And so, Mark, I wanted to ask you then, are there any sorts of drug delivery systems or ideas that we haven't talked about or that haven't come up as far as, contraception, or that you see as appealing for male contraception in particular, maybe anything that's not focused on that should be?
Yeah, well, I'll start a little selfishly talking about a project that we've been working on with Jennifer at FHI. And this is a long-acting implant. So again, it's for female contraception. And the unique property of it is that it's completely biodegradable. So it's an implant that serves, like a Norplant type system for, steady release of a steroid for a long period of time. And then eventually completely dissolves. Now, the nice thing about this system is keeping in mind that people would like it to be reversible, potentially, or you might not want it for the duration that it's designed to work. This polymer is unique that as it degrades, it maintains its mechanical stability quite well up till near the end of the degradation. So it's removable in the same way that a silicone-based system is. And I think this could be expandable to this type of system, made either from our polymer or from other kinds of polymers. You could easily see how that would be translatable to male contraception or other applications. There's also an interesting approach that Bob Langer and his group at MIT have taken to make long-acting orally administered systems. And so these are very cleverly engineered devices that look like pills, but when you swallow them, a device emerges from the pill that has a shape and a size that prohibits it from passing out of the stomach. And it also has the quality that it can release agents over a long period of time once it's released. So it's really remarkable. They've advanced this, and it sounds, you immediately think about safety concerns with a device that deploys itself in your intestinal tract. But it seems to be that they've identified materials and mechanisms that make it safe. And so you could imagine then having the best of both worlds, an oral system, but one that's also long lasting. And so the benefits in compliance and uptake that you might expect from that. I think that's a really interesting approach. I mean, I think it's still in male contraception, it would be interesting to think about systems, and people have thought about systems that involve biomaterials maybe, but not drugs. And there have been people that have worked for years on sort of a reversible vasectomy, instead of surgically doing a vasectomy, putting something inside the vas deferens that blocks the passage of sperm, but could be reversed. And I think the systems that have been tested have been imperfect, and that has made them not move into wide acceptance or commercialization. But I think with all we've learned about the ability to make different kinds of biomaterials that are smart, that have functions that can be controlled, and the ability to control them even from outside the body in different ways, I think that's something that I think ought to be explored, and there's potential there. And I keep thinking in that same light that with all we know about biomaterials or materials in general, and all the advances that we've made in the last 50 years in material science, someone's going to make a better condom. I think that would be a remarkable advance.
Absolutely. So, thinking about your comments on biomaterials and thinking about the dramatically different environments of, let's say, the inside of a stomach versus like something injected the vas deferens. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of even on a conceptual level, not even a development level, trying to find materials that are compatible with the very specific space that you're trying to put them into?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. So so I'll start somewhere. I think one of the first kinds of sort of design decisions you make is, do you want something that's going to be degradable or not degradable? And that sort of leads you to think about different kinds of materials. If you're thinking about drug delivery, you also think about the properties of the agent that you have. How you design a material that releases a water-soluble drug is very different than how you design a material that releases one that's lipid soluble. And so the sort of kind of design principles you use in doing that. And the other element that I think has restricted people's thinking, maybe overly in the past, has been people tend to want to use materials that have been approved products by the FDA. So materials that the FDA has some experience with. And the FDA doesn't approve materials for drug delivery as such. They look at a whole product, but you have a much easier time if the elements that are in your product have been examined by the FDA before. And I think that there's many new materials that people can make that are similar in some ways to materials that have been approved by the FDA, but different enough that they would have to go through a whole evaluation. But that I've noticed that there's more people doing that kind of thing now, and the FDA seems more open to accepting that kind of an approach. And I think that's a good thing for the field. It leaves inventors with room to think about novel systems that haven't been used before.
Yeah. So then thinking about your comments there on materials, I'd like to switch to Jennifer and ask your thoughts on the difficulties of developing APIs and combining them with those materials. What are some of the hurdles that come up with like compatibility in chemistry?
So that's an interesting question. And so we've kind of done the reverse, is we have a delivery system and then we select the API, and we found that we've selected different APIs depending on the delivery system, because they're not all compatible. And so some of it, as Mark mentioned, solubility is a big issue, and not, just in terms of release, like a more water soluble drug will tend to release faster unless you can control it, but also just compatibility with whatever formulation and process that you're using. We've had some projects where they wanted a highly organic soluble drug just because you're making microspheres that require that in the process, and then others where the solubility, like if we wanted an trying not to give away too much, the solubility actually worked against us in processing. And so we've also had projects where, in order to get the API into the delivery system, you needed to melt it. And so we've selected APIs that had like lower melting temperatures and also kind of a wider window between melting and degradation. So a lot of the materials that we work with are biodegradable polymers, and the eventual process is an extrusion process, which is high temperature. So you also need to consider the stability, not just in the process while you're making the implant, but also after the product has been fabricated. A lot of the products that we're developing are intended for populations in the developing world, so very higher temperature and stability requirements than a product being sold to a hospital, for instance. And so with the long-acting formula product, the development timeline is very long. Mark mentioned a product that we're working on that's intended for 18 to 24 months. So really understanding the key issues about your API, how it's compatible with just not only the formulation in terms of you need to control the drug release properties, but also have it the process of making it. And then we often look at terminal sterilization, mostly from a cost perspective. And so the stability of the API, not just on its own, but also in a terminal sterilization conditions, radiation or high temperature, with the matrix of the polymer needs to be evaluated. And so, and then the last thing that's kind of dictated us how some delivery systems are more feasible for others than others is the potency of the drug. So we have programs in long-acting injectables, the biodegradable implants that we mentioned, but we also have a microneedle patch. And there's such small volume in those needles that it only really works for very potent APIs. And luckily, a lot of the hormonal progestins that we are working with are very potent, but that type of delivery platform may not lend itself as well to other APIs. So I would say the opportunities for delivery are vast, but you really want to understand the physical and chemical properties of that API with whatever delivery system and process to really make sure that you're going to get it to work, especially given the long timeline for development.
That's really important. Thank you. And I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned about, working in developing countries. Do you find that there are some specific challenges working with, let's say, international developers or manufacturers, even after that you've done the boots on the ground research to pair this API with this delivery system?
We are still working our way around some of the issues. We do have some partners in China, for instance, we've had increased political tensions between the countries and shipping materials in and out. There's always going to be logistical issues when you're working in a different country. And just understanding the regulatory landscape in terms of what can be imported and exported and what approvals are needed. If you manufacture in another country, often you need the local approval in addition to the whatever other, FDA or EMA approval that you may be seeking. So I think there's a lot of opportunities with working with international partners and manufacturers. I think just understanding the logistics and the politics and kind of the administrative hurdles with that and the regulatory challenges is upfront is very important.
Things that a chemistry background gives you very little insight into, I'm sure.
I know way more about import and export from China than I ever thought I would.
Sure, yeah. So the next question I had is for the group, and I'll call on you individually because I'd really love to hear your nuances on this. I'd like to know where you see the contraceptive delivery landscape in the future, and that can be, 10 years away, 15 years away, or further. Are there any like really out there ideas that the tech just isn't there to support yet, but we could do it someday? Or are there any ideas that, if we just started doing it now, we could have it really soon? I kind of start again from right next to me on the screen, but Rahima, I'd love for you to just jump in and take off.
Ooh, this kind of takes me back to like an ideation workshop that I went to with Heather and the team at FHI, which was one of my favorite trips to India. And I remember we had broken down into these small groups to just ideate on what could be the next idea for a contraceptive. And one of the things that I kept doing is, no, this is not going to work because, no, this is not going to. And then I remember just Heather just saying, listen, forget it's not going to work because just imagine that there's going to be someone who would have this magic wand and solve all these things. Still just think. And it was like one of the favorite things I've heard, because it was just like, okay, stop thinking about the details, just let your brain just go haywire, just think. And so I think if you think futuristically, we've been relying on a lot of like traditional engineering processes. And I think it's time to kind of like venture out of the traditional engineering processes. So I think there are a lot of like up and coming processes that can be applied to contraception and drug delivery in general. 3D printing is one of them. Bioprinting is one of them. I think there is a lot of like techniques and new avenues that we haven't explored yet. So I think maybe thinking beyond the traditional, making a pill with a pill press, like the traditional way, or extrusion for implants. What else can we do? And even beyond the engineering processes, are there any other delivery platforms that we haven't thought of besides like an implant, besides like a pill that we haven't really thought about? And I think it's just a matter of thinking about all the hurdles that Mark and Jennifer talked about earlier, and that is, acceptability, accessibility. Is it going to work with the APIs? How much can it deliver, for how long, and all of that. So I think there are. I'm very optimistic that there has to be some new avenues out there, and it's time to start exploring them. And so I think it's just a matter of kind of getting over the hurdle of traditional and moving towards new avenues. That's the way I see it.
So before I move on, I do want to add, you mentioned 3D printing there. And I know that you've done some work here. Can you talk to me a little bit about how 3D printing can play a role both in prototyping? I understand that you could really easily make something new and test it out. Can it also play a role in like downstream manufacturing and streamlining and improving those processes as well?
Yeah, I think 3D printing is definitely emerging as the next generation engineering, not only for prototyping, like it has existed for the past 3 decades or so. I think there are new 3D printing technologies that are commercially scalable. And so we are definitely using one of them. The clip technology is allowing us to manufacture intravaginal rings for the next generation multi-purpose technology for HIV prevention and contraception, for women's health as well. But I think there are a lot more that can be done with technologies that are fast, that provide the high speed for manufacturing, but also the ability to actually manufacture parts that have high resolution and can have the properties of the final product that would be actually commercialized and useful and translated into human use. So I think there's definitely, and what I mentioned is just one technique. There are multiple ones out there, but I think the time for looking at 3D printing as a prototyping technology has already passed. So I think given that, it's really an opportunity to look at it as a new engineering process, but 3D printing is just one process. I think there's a lot more engineering processes that can be explored. And as I mentioned, 3D bioprinting as well, like looking at new bioinks, materials for regenerative medicine and other applications like designing implants or delivery systems is definitely out there as well. So they're new and emerging, but they're definitely not considered prototyping technologies only, and they're even being considered for pill manufacturing these days. So I think it's really moving forward to translation and scalability, and even replacing the traditional methods with these new methods, just because of their capabilities that you can't really achieve with the traditional engineering processes, making them personalized, making them more fine-tuning, more you can more adaptable to population needs, so on and so forth. So I think the sky is the limit. We just need to keep going after it.
Awesome, thank you. So Mark, you're next. I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of the future of contraceptive delivery. Where will we be in 10, 15 years or more?
Yeah, I've never been very good about predicting the future, but I'll give it a shot. But I'll start by talking about the past, because I know I see Kevin Whaley is here, and Kevin and I worked in the late 1980s on some antibodies he'd identified that could agglutinate sperm and prevent them from fertilizing. And so we eventually developed antibody delivery systems that were vaginal rings, but we thought about using these as male contraceptives as well. This was in sort of after work conversations mainly, but you could certainly make an implant. We could make an implant at that time that would slowly release antibodies, and you could implant it in the testicle, and the penis would turn into a delivery system for both sperm and anti-sperm. And I really liked that concept. And we've continued looking at concepts like that in other areas. The idea of local delivery. So with a pill, you naturally almost all the time get delivery to all the tissues and organs in the body, and you hope that your agent is targeted so that it only affects the tissue that you want to affect, but often, as you know, they don't. An alternate way to think about that is just to deliver agents to the tissues that you want, and that's what you would do if you were putting an implant in the testicle, for example. But that doesn't seem like an idea that's going to catch on. But could you achieve that in other ways? For example, by having tiny particles, nanoparticles that are loaded with your drug, but targeted so that if you inject them or you orally ingest them, they only accumulate in the testes or in the tissue that you want to have an effect on. And I think that has seemed like that's an idea that also is not new, but it's been very difficult to materialize it, to make it work. And I think we're starting to learn a lot more about how to miniaturize delivery systems, to make them very small, and how to make them multifunctional, and how to identify means of targeting that really do work. I think that's still in the future. We still don't have products that work that way, even though the idea's been around for a long time. But I do think that kind of thinking, one of the challenges with it is that it is most of the materials you would use in that way are expensive. And so to make it an effective contraceptive, we have to learn how to manufacture these kinds of things much more cheaply as well.
Yeah, there's so many complicating things that it would be easy if it weren't for X in contraception, and there's a lot of X's that make it harder. Yeah. Jennifer, what about you? Anything that you see, imagine coming down the pipeline in 10, 15, 20 years plus that would really shape our future for us?
No, I mean, I agree with everything that Rahima and Mark said, and we really need to think outside the box. Full advocate, as I said earlier, of having multiple options available. I really like the long-lasting oral technology that Mark was mentioning about. There's also been some work on different technologies that you can turn on and off. So, implanted at, when you're young, turn on the drug. If you decide to have kids, turn it off, turn it on. I think there's lots of novel things that could possibly be out there. I really like the idea of targeted drug delivery. I do think we need, not just new delivery systems, but new APIs, because one of the biggest concerns that we hear from women in the hormonal space is side effects. And so I think continuing to develop new APIs with better side effect profiles in combination with some more novel options. And I think really, I'm a big proponent. I went to a similar workshop in Kenya to the one that Rahima was talking about. And I'm a big component of like human-centered design, like figuring out what people want and kind of reverse engineering. And some of the ideas are going to be out there, but I think, we've made so much progress. And as Mark said, so many things have been kind of developed, but not really seen to fruition, or maybe not different technologies that haven't been paired or brought together. So I think there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah, it's great. And I love what you said about human-centered design too. I think it's always nice to start with the answer and work backwards, kind of like almost like you were talking about with starting with a delivery system and finding an API to match. Sometimes it's easier if you can approach the problem from both ends, or even just the reverse end, it might be easier. So
absolutely.
Brian, do you have any thoughts on the future and where your imagination might take you, where we might be in a certain time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I echo all of the comments that Rahima, Mark, and Jennifer said about just novel delivery methods and novel APIs that really match user preferences. I will say, just to give a different perspective here, right? And Logan, this about me is that I've always believed that no matter what formulation you create, no matter what delivery system you find, and however much you think that you have met, user-centered design, we will not get good, uptake without real culture change, right? And so, what sometimes seems like a radical idea that I have is male culture change, right? How do I get men to, change and be willing to see the doctor more, be willing to take on reproductive responsibility? In fact, actually, I think it's already there. It's already beginning to show up, but it's not quite visible because of the stigma surrounding contraception, or men's discussions about sexual responsibility. Maybe it's role modeling. So. And, you mentioned like things that I think could be on the horizon in about like 10, 15, 20 years. It might take that long to see culture change. But if there's one thing I'm looking forward to, it's a society where, family planning and contraceptive discussions are, very much engaged with both parties, and that education is not one-sided. So if there's one thing I can invest in, it'd be culture change.
You don't know how much I love that answer. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that from everyone. Those are the questions that I had as the moderator. And so I'd like to take this time to open it up to the audience. If anybody has any questions, they're welcome to plug them into the chat. And I'm more than happy to ask them and address the audience or ask the panel with them. You can either address panelists individually or as a group, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question with your voice and your camera, feel free to go ahead. So with that, does anybody have anything they'd like to bring to the conversation? Yeah, I see Margaret's got her hand raised over there. Go ahead.
Is there any work going on what you might call his and hers technology, where a male technology is paired with a female technology, and then of course the failure rates can be lower higher for each, where you think about trying to distribute reproductive control equally to both partners? Is there any work going on like that?
Does anybody on the panel have anything to contribute for that one?
I am not aware of any. That was something that did come up in one of the user-centered design workshops that I participated in, but I am not personally aware of any.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not aware either, but I do remember this discussion brought up, like Jennifer mentioned, but I'm not aware of such such a thing being in development currently. It is a good idea, though.
I'm actually really curious, Margaret, what you think is the well, how that might look. Is that like two different compounds that people might use, different drugs, or is it something that is collaborated on?
Well, I don't know. My field's philosophy and
Okay.
ethics, and so I'm not a designer of systems. But on the other hand, if you think about what might be appealing, because what you don't want in developing male contraceptives is to have control taken away from the female on the grounds that the male is doing it, or vice versa, right? It's been the other way around. What you really want, seems to me, is to have contraceptive control held by both parties. And then the question is there any reason you would design systems that aren't exactly interactive, but at least are compatible with each other?
Yeah, I mean, this is
a sort of airhead question, but it might not be irrelevant.
I think it's actually really important for both individuals within a dyad to, either be aware and fully trust that the other person is using contraception, or both use contraception of their own, or in the example that you're kind of bringing up here, is there some kind of collaborative method here? Now, some people would argue that condoms are barrier methods.
Yeah, right. They're used in concert with the longer acting female ones.
Right, or I mean, the female partner puts the condom on for the male partner. Like little interactions like that can make it interactive. There is a method called, Phexi or Amphora, which is a gel that women are placing in the vagina as a spermicide, possible microbicide. And so, to some extent, are there ways to, think of that as a combined male-female method? Currently, it's being marketed as a female method. But there are certainly aspects of it that will be acceptable to men as well.
I can jump in a little bit too here to say that there are some methods in early development that could maybe target sperm, either delivered to men or to women, but they could have the exact same biological target and have the same pharmaceutical that acts upon that target. But there, of course, would be unique challenges in either delivering to men or to women, depending on, sperm will be localized in the uterus versus in the testes. How do we get drug to those different locations? Does the amount matter? There are a lot of really big questions to be answered around that, but it's a super interesting possibility. Mark had mentioned his conversations with Kevin Whaley about something that agglutinates sperm that you embed in the testes, and I see Deborah Anderson's on here as well with anti-sperm antibodies that can theoretically have a number of different delivery mechanisms. So just to say that those projects are all possible, but I also know that so many drug developers that it's hard to focus on multiple indications and multiple people because it's so difficult and so costly to even get something through for just men or just women. And often it would be easier to get approved for one and demonstrate safety and effectiveness, and then seek a separate indication for another one. Deborah, is there anything you wanted to chime in with on there? I saw you raise your hand for a moment.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to reinforce the topical approach. We've been working with vaginal films and monoclonal antibodies for some time, and we've got an MPT product that delivers antibodies to HIV and herpes, and we have a new one, anti-sperm antibody that looks really promising in phase 1 clinical trials. And we've just been brainstorming our group about how we might leverage this to male delivery system. And we were thinking of maybe putting the antibodies in a lube, a sex lube, to enhance the delivery of these antibodies, or even in a biofilm kind of system where you spray it on the penis and the antibodies are delivered gradually. So anyway, we're having kind of fun with this topical approach. I think there's been a resurgence in the contraceptive field in topicals, so this could be good timing.
I see another question in the chat from Aisha King. What are some ways to bring about culture change that could lead to greater involvement of males in family planning and reproductive health? Anyone want to field that?
I guess it's a good question for me to answer. So as an OBGYN, something I always try to do is invite the male partner in for any encounter, really, just for him to understand, so much of what women go through in order to avoid pregnancy, or even when pregnancies, end up in, difficult, dangerous, or bad outcomes. It's important for men to know, because I think that when I talk to some of the men who are in some of our trials, or some men who are very interested in vasectomy, one of their, biggest concerns is, how can I, do my part, right? How can I make sure this never happens again in the case of miscarriage, right? So that there are men who are sensitized. And so as long as you continue to reinforce to them that, it's very important for them to be there in support of their female partner, you kind of open up the narrative for engagement. And then the discussion about contraception, right? So what are the options? And then opening it up to, male partners who have experienced their female partners having a difficult time with contraception in any number of ways, right? Those are all moments where you can sensitize men. So that's kind of what I do.
Logan, this is Kevin Whaley. I just wanted to ask the panel, and especially start my dear friend Mark Saltzman, starting it off, about polymers. Are back in the day when you and I were working together closely, there were problems with the polymers being available to small manufacturers. And so I wanted your thoughts on a lot of these polymers that people are working with, the panel is working with. Are they readily available? And we do have manufacturers, because I'm just interested in those downstream manufacturers. Can we get these products that all of us have been working on for many years? Can we get them commercialized?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. It's great to hear your voice, and I'll start. But I think that situation has improved in many ways dramatically since, say, 1990, when we were trying to get materials, and especially if you're interested in the kinds of commonly used degradable biomaterials, lactide glycolite copolymers, for example. There's many suppliers, and you can get them in all sorts of grades and types. More specialized ones are less available, and you have to do custom synthesis or be able to synthesize them yourselves, and that's a real barrier to entry, either in cost or expertise. I think one other side of that is that interestingly, I was working on with a company on a consumer product that would involve polylactic acid, polylactide, a very commonly used polymer, and we couldn't get it, and we couldn't find anybody to make it to our specifications, because the supply of polylactic acid is far outstripped by the demand, thanks to 3D printing success. And so it remains a challenge. I think it's better than it was before, but if you're going to use a material that's unique, you have to think through either making it yourself or finding a reliable place that will custom make it for you.
And then Mark, just follow up, sorry. Then are there actual GMP manufacturers that can work with these new polymers, or is that a problem?
There are. That's actually improved a lot too, and I think that's thanks mainly to the number of companies that have developed sort of microparticle or nanoparticle approaches to drug delivery, particularly cancer. But there's a whole set of CROs that now are available to make those kind of things. Again, not so affordable often, but they are available.
So it looks like we have time for one more question. I see Heather's got her hand up. Heather, jump in.
Thanks, and thanks to the panel. And oh, I'm raising every hand I own right now. That's what I get for trying to be sassy with my hand raising emojis. So thank you to the panel. This has been a great discussion and something that I'm super interested in, basically from my work with you guys and coming to MCI. I don't hear us talking about delivery systems, well, grantees and folks in the space talking as much about delivery systems as I think I'd like. And I'm curious when you guys might recommend that people start thinking about how their products would be delivered. So a lot of folks, I think, are of the mindset, and Logan, correct me if I'm wrong, that to just get proof of concept and all of this, let's just, forgive my oversimplification, but let's just get it in a pill and demonstrate that it works. And I feel like my limited knowledge of how this process works, I'm not a chemist, and it seems like it would be maybe a little more fruitful to consider these early on. And I'm curious what the panelists think, because I also realize I could be way off by that. So.
I think that you should start looking, as soon as you've got an API. I mentioned earlier that for a longer acting technology, the development timeline is longer. And so once you have approval in a pill, like getting the next approval for the longer acting product, you could be paving the way. But I absolutely think all of us have said this throughout this discussion, is we tend to box ourselves in with what's known, and there's so many other opportunities out there. And I think, once you have your API, I talked about the chemical and physical characterization kind of dictating what the different delivery possibilities are. There's also understanding the bioavailability. Like, we work with some APIs that are not orally absorbable and so need to be administered through other routes. So kind of understanding to the pharmacology of the APIs through different routes of administration. But I would absolutely recommend looking at those possibilities, very early on in development, even if that's not the first product that you want to get approved. I think understanding the possibilities and starting that, especially for some of these that have much longer timelines.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I want to especially thank our panelists for providing some of their valuable time, as well as their thoughts on such an important topic for us. And I want to thank the audience for joining us as well. We'll get things polished up and put on our website for too long. But with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much for coming.